Hi, how you doing? Well, we are in prime weed growing season. It's warmed up. We had a few nice rains in June to really get those weed seeds germinating. Now is a really great time to get a handle on those weeds before they get too big, or worse, before they start seeding out. Today I'm going to share my philosophy on weeding with you, my favorite tools for the job, and also an organic pre-emergent that I think I'm going to test. Plus, I'm going to be straight with you about why and how I occasionally use targeted chemical control in my yard. My name is Sharon, and I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. So just for context, I'm referring to weeds in this video as anything that I don't want growing somewhere in my yard, and that includes a number of perennials and weedy tree seedlings. They provide me a lot of weed pressure, and of course there's also all the unwanted grass and thistle and lots of annual weeds, some easy and some are stubborn. I think that weed growth needs to be routinely managed because weeds can take over an area very quickly and make growing desirable plants very difficult. Some weed growth isn't terrible, a little bit, but when it chokes out what you're trying to really grow, then there's a problem. And certainly leaving tree seedlings to take hold can cause some major problems down the road. And in my yard, I'm not talking about the odd seedling here or there. In any given year, I have hundreds, if not thousands, of mostly Manitoba maple, green ash, chokecherry seedlings. Also, shrubs like dogwood, common elderberry make themselves at home very quickly. Especially in my backyard, dense plantings give prime opportunity for many undesirables to take hold. I can't take a walk in any part of the yard on any given day and not find a weed. That's impossible. And I have, to some extent, learned to live with that fact. For me, it's just not physically or mentally healthy to obsess about weeds. Obsessing about weeds takes time away from planting and harvesting and, above all, from enjoying the garden. Let's just say I try and get the worst of them. I've made peace with the fact that I'm managing weeds and not eradicating them. The goal in my yard is to prevent them from going to seed and also from stealing resources from plants that I actually want to grow. That's the win. Perfection, like those overly tidy AI-generated garden images, is rarely achievable for a single gardener with a large yard. And honestly, I personally don't think that should be the goal. I don't use the same method for weeding everywhere. In the backyard, amongst the perennials and in the dense shrub plantings, I hand weed by pulling them. This is always easiest after a heavy watering or a good soaking rain. Pulling weeds from dry soil makes it just 10 times as hard. I once accidentally left the sprinkler on overnight on a perennial area, so it got a really great deep soaking, and I'll tell you, a couple days later, those weeds just came out like I was pulling them out of soft butter. Even the long quackgrass roots pulled out with ease that day. And when I hand weed, I use this hori-hori knife. This is by far my favorite tool in the garden for many tasks. I also have a low stool that I sit on to save my knees and my back. It also doubles as a kneeler. But really, I just plop myself amongst the growth. I use this hori-hori knife to loosen roots if needed, and I keep a bucket close by to toss the weeds into. The stool helps a lot. You all know that I had back surgery about 6 months ago, and I'm currently having some trouble with my knees that's keeping me from my usual squat in the garden. With the stool, I don't get sore knees, I don't get a sore back, or I don't get a sore neck. Bending over is more of a hip hinge that's easy on the body. And in the backyard perennial beds, I also use flax straw mulch, which helps deprive weed seeds of light. And so I usually really only have to do one early summer backyard kind of marathon weeding day, and then it's not too difficult for the rest of the season. Maybe a round with a bucket once every couple weeks. I do overlook small weeds if they're not causing any immediate trouble. I always try to get them out of the way though before they set flower and seed out. And this also includes perennials, many of which I have to deadhead soon after the bloom is finished to prevent seeds from forming. That to me is just general perennial maintenance and keeping a well-tended garden. Allowing plants you don't want more of to set and throw seeds is just setting yourself up really for years of trouble, as those seeds will continue to germinate. I have learned from far too much experience that you don't want to put that task off. The tree seeds tend to germinate early, so I get the vast majority of them during that early summer weeding marathon. But I do have to spend more time in the undergrowth of established shrubs or big perennials to manage what's going on under there. Those tend to be projects where I spend even a couple hours in one section getting everything out that needs to be out. It includes trimming up, digging up rooted branches for new shrubs, pulling weeds, maybe applying more straw mulch. I tuck myself in close on my stool, and that's also enjoyable and satisfying task for me, not too difficult really. As I mentioned, mulching is really effective at keeping weeds at bay, but it has to be a good thick layer to smother the weeds or deprive the weed seeds of light. And as I said, I use straw. It's a resource that I can get. Grass clippings work too, but they should be added in thin layers so they don't heat up and rot. Grass clippings mixed with dry chopped leaves, that's fantastic. And of course, there are all kinds of wood mulches that come bagged or in bulk. Weed-free compost is also an excellent option. I like to mulch my vegetable garden with my homemade compost, but my compost is not free of seeds. So I get a number of things germinating, like tomatoes or cucumbers or sunflowers. Whatever seed has gone into the compost, that's what I get germinating. I also like a nice layer of straw mulch in the vegetable garden, generally applied around early July after the soil has warmed up good. There I like to use a cereal straw, not a flax straw. And adding cardboard or newspaper underneath mulch is very effective at smothering. That's an excellent way to control chickweed, by the way. But it is somewhat labor intensive, a little more labor intensive, because you do have to lay out the cardboard or the newspaper, and I find it best used to wet it down really well and then pile the mulch on top. Especially when wet, that cardboard or newspaper breaks down fairly quickly, so the benefit of it is fairly short. And of course, any mulch still does have to be maintained, as weed seeds blow in. They blow into mulch, and there's all kinds of nooks and crannies there for seeds to nestle in and get growing. But overall, pulling weeds from mulch is easy. If your mulch is thick enough, those weed roots just pull right out and come up with no trouble at all. Or this type of cultivator tool will fluff up mulch and get weeds at the same time. In the gravel garden and the vegetable garden, I mostly use these long-handled tools. My favorite weeding tools are ones that don't disturb too much of the top layer of soil or gravel, so as not to bring more weed seeds to the surface where they can germinate. In tight spaces, I have these two tools, this 2-inch wire hoe and this about 4-inch narrow blade hoe. These are most effective in the vegetable garden in between the rows and plants. And this small blade hoe I also like for knocking down young weeds in the gravel garden. I'm still battling weed seeds that came along with the gravel, particularly wild buckwheat, and that's an awful weed if it gets out of control. Andy keeps this tool sharp by honing it for me, and it takes care of the gravel garden in just a few minutes. This wire hoe originally came from Lee Valley many years ago, and I see it is no longer available. A Dutch hoe or a loop hoe would be similarly effective. And there's no getting around having a good, sharp, regular hoe either. For larger areas, for me, along the grassy edging, and sometimes to weed beneath the mulch, a sharp, regular hoe is really effective. I don't mind this kind of task. It's not difficult work. You're just standing there, and it is really satisfying to look at the progress. I also noticed that since I started frequently using a leaf blower on my brick and rock paths a few years ago, I seem to get fewer weed seedlings in between the bricks. I can't prove it works, but I'm keeping it up. I don't use household vinegar or salt in the yard. They can damage your soil pH and structure for years, and they're just not effective long-term on established weeds. It does work temporarily. The acetic acid in vinegar destroys the plant's cell walls while the salt then dehydrates it. but salt leaches and can render soil uninhabitable for future plants. And also there's a thing about sprinkling baking soda on weeds to kill them, and that's similar to salt. Excessive baking soda can change the soil chemistry. So I want to be upfront. I'm not an organic purist, nor have I ever professed to be. For me, gardening is about finding practical solutions that work for my large property and within my physical limits. Chemicals are an absolute last resort, not my first line of defense. I only use them in very specific, impossible situations. They are not my lazy way out of weeding, to be sure. To be clear, I am not recommending the use of chemical control, nor am I getting into any kind of debate about its use, because I know this is a hot topic. It's available to purchase. Store shelves are filled with all kinds of different targeted weed control. What I would say is that if it's a choice you do decide to use, do so with full knowledge of what it will kill. Different products will target different vegetation. Some, like glyphosate, kills everything green. Some kills just broadleaf and is safe for lawns, and some kills grassy growth and is safe for other stuff. Also, read all the directions on how to use it properly and with a great deal of caution. Finally, keep a healthy fear of any misuse, either to yourself, pets, other animals or birds that come to your yard, neighboring property, and that includes a full understanding of the product's drift and sometimes also what happens when you're using it during times of high humidity. One product is in no way the same as the next, and it should not be treated that way. Targeted herbicide control should absolutely not be abused in any way and should not just be sprayed around willy-nilly. In any of the rocky areas I have, like at the end of the driveway, along the driveway, and the rock paths, most of the weeds are darn near impossible to get by hand weeding or with a tool. It's here that chemical control is my only option. Used with a great deal of care and only on the calmest of days, fully garbed with long pants and sleeves, socks, closed shoes, good glove protection. I always work backwards so I'm not stepping in anything that I've just sprayed. I spray just within an inch or two of the plants, only on the green, enough to wet the plants. You don't need to saturate them. I have a rolling battery operated sprayer with a long reach, and that helps greatly. I also sometimes use a sponge brush that I dip into the chemical and then dab it on some weeds that might be near a perennial or on a freshly cut tree sapling. And for areas where the quack grass is getting out of control, I use a bucket with the bottom cut out and a squirt sprayer, and I spray only in that bucket. This is a very slow process that I don't rush. I kind of do it on kind of like a grid system, and that is to make sure I don't damage any other plants in the process. Here I'm going to address the clustered bellflower weed. It is for sure awful, and I have battled it once, but not in this yard. Here I have only ever had a small bit that came along with a plant that was given to me, and then I took care of it just by constantly pulling the growth and never allowing it really to photosynthesize. Not many plants will thrive if that can't happen. But there was a fairly substantial infestation in another yard that I addressed, and I took care of it with glyphosate. One spray of a concentrate mixed just a little stronger, and then after 3 years it has not returned. I just checked on it the other day and it's still gone. Andy takes care of the lawn, so I really have no input there. But I know that he very occasionally spot sprays with a lawn-safe herbicide if there are a lot of weeds. I can't really think of the last time that happened. More so, keeping a thick, healthy lawn is his focus for the best defense for weeds. He mows high, frequently, and our lawn mowers are mulching mowers. Also, the odd dandelion in the lawn really doesn't bother either of us as long as the flower is pulled so it doesn't set seed. Hand pulling those few weeds from the lawn is just as effective. And we have 2 empty lots across the street from us, and they are absolutely solid yellow with dandelion flowers when it's dandelion season. So when they're seeding out, we really hope for a north wind that's pushing them in the other direction. My vegetable garden beds have a lot of henbit weed. Fun fact, henbit is edible. I've never been desperate enough to try it. I'm sure it's delicious if you're into that sort of thing. I prefer to just pull it out. Henbit is probably the worst weed I have in my vegetable beds and in the paths. It looks a lot like creeping Charlie. It flowers early, sets a million seeds, grows in any soil, grows in the rocks, grows in sun, grows in shade. It's just a perpetual weed. I have all these crushed rock paths in the vegetable garden, and even though there is commercial grade landscape fabric underneath, henbit will grow absolutely anywhere. These paths have been here for over 20 years, and it's no longer just rock over landscape fabric. Soil has fallen in, blown in, etc., and especially along the edges where soil from the beds has fallen, this is where I get all manner of weeds. They're difficult to pull when small, but honestly, once they're a little bit bigger, they are easier to grasp and yank out. There is a product in the United States called preen, and it's been available there for many years. It's never been available in Canada. It is made of corn gluten meal, which is a byproduct of processing corn, and it works as a pre-emergent herbicide. 100% corn gluten meal is organic, safe for immediate use of the area by children, pets, etc. When corn gluten meal is applied to an area, weed seeds still do germinate, but they are unable to grow because the corn gluten meal dries out the newly formed root radicals. Pre-COVID, Andy and I used to travel down to Minot for an annual shopping trip, and I bought and used preen a few times in the yard, and it was quite effective. But this type of product was not available in Canada at the time. It is now. Something similar is available now. Just let me clarify that corn gluten meal is not the same as cornmeal. And, like what you make cornbread with. You're just wasting good cornmeal if you try to use it as weed control. It's also not the same as the livestock product that's available as a feed. The pre-emergent needs to have a protein content of 60% or more, and that livestock feed runs about 25%. In recent years in Canada, lawn care companies have started selling corn gluten meal in large bags for use as a pre-emergent and fertilizer on lawns. Corn gluten meal contains 9% or sometimes 10% nitrogen content, so that's where the fertilizer aspect comes in. I don't know if it's going to work, but here is my experiment for the season. I bought 2 bags of this Vigoro product because that's the one that was on sale, but other lawn fertilizer companies make the same stuff. Vigoro calls it weed and feed, which at first blush you wouldn't think would be organic or safe. I bought it with the intent not to use this on the lawn, but rather I want to spread it on all the rock paths in the vegetable garden and the rocky area along the driveway. I'm going to do this with the scoop that I have. 1 bag is supposed to cover 1,000 square feet, applied at a rate of 2 pounds per 100 square feet, which would be an average about 40 to 50 feet of path for me. It does nothing to kill existing growth of any kind. Weeds already germinated and growing, they're just going to get a boost of nitrogen from this product, as would grass or perennials or vegetables. It wouldn't kill my existing weeds. I have to take care of those separately. But it should stop the vast majority of weeds from growing for the rest of the season. I think this is supposed to be effective for about 3 months. At least, this is my hope. There is some timing involved in spreading this. After you spread it, you have to wet it down with about 1/4 inch of water using a fine spray. And that kind of gets it activated, I guess, for lack of a better word. But then there needs to be a few days of dry weather following that application, because a heavy downpour will dilute it and ruin its effectiveness. Just applying it dry and doing nothing and waiting for rain isn't recommended, I guess, and it could also possibly attract rodents, as this is a product made from corn. Wetting it down is supposed to dissolve it, sort of, and get it working immediately. So as I said, this won't take care of existing weeds, but it will also stop desirable seeds from germinating. So you wouldn't want to spread it in your vegetable garden while you're trying to germinate vegetable seeds or hoping for self-sown flowers. But after your vegetables or flowers have germinated and are growing, it should be safe to use along or in between the rows. I'm planning to also spread this on my onion bed, which I think would welcome the nitrogen. That would be a thought, that would be a concern, that you would be giving whatever plants a boost of nitrogen. And in my onion beds, it should also stop the henbit from germinating for the rest of the summer. Again, that's my hope, and I'm going to let you know in a future video how that all worked out. However you tackle your weeds, most of all, shift your mindset. I think I've learned to enjoy weeding much like I enjoy raking. It's a time to disconnect. I've adopted that little and often technique. I grab a bucket and I go on a 15-minute weed pulling tour through the yard. Not a huge day-long marathon session that leaves me sore and tired at the end of the day. That's why people don't like weeding. Big problem areas need more time and often more resources, of course. But those aren't constant. They tend to be once a season type of a project to be approached with almost with project management. I think it's best not to leave your little weed problem to become a big project because that's not just kicking the can down the road. That can becomes a barrel, and that barrel eventually becomes a tank. Learning to love or at least tolerate weeding comes down to shifting your mindset. Instead of thinking that you're fighting a losing battle, think of it as a form of just mindful meditation. Reframe the task as a sensory, rhythmic break. Adopt that little and often approach. I think I've turned what most see as a notorious chore into a rather deeply satisfying stress-relieving ritual. That's the real win in the garden. Thanks for watching this video today. I always appreciate you taking the time to do so. And thank you for supporting real content from real creators. I hope you found today's video helpful, and if you did, give me a thumbs up, maybe a hype, and if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, maybe give that a tap too. I hope you're doing well. See you soon.